Welcome to Imperfect Genius, the podcast that provides insights into navigating the business development journey and offers advice on building successful careers in the tech industry. I'm your host, Rachel Foster, a tech professional, educator, and entrepreneur. Hey, everybody. So I mentioned in an earlier podcast earlier this year that I am planning on restarting my speed networking initiative. I think I'm going to restart that in June. I haven't set the date exactly yet. I'm thinking either mid-May or early June, mid to late May or early June, somewhere in there. I'm going to restart that speed networking initiative. So, sort of like leading up to that, I thought it would be a good idea to just talk a little bit about networking. And so, I started sketching out some ideas that I wanted to talk about, and unfortunately, it turned into like what is starting to look like a 4 to 5 episode little mini series of episodes on a whole story arc on networking. I feel like that might be a little bit much, and you all might get sick of hearing me talk about the same topic. Or actually, if I'm being honest, it's more likely that I'll just get sick of talking about the same topic. Although there's different aspects of it that I want to talk about. But so I'm not sure that the mini series will be um in sequence, meaning, oh, I mean, it'll be in sequence, but I may break it up. I may do 2 episodes on networking and then do an episode on something else and then come back to the networking mini series and so on. So, because I just feel like I might need to break it up, but we'll see. We'll see. But I thought it would be a good idea to start with a story because honestly, and it wasn't until I was thinking about this, and I started sort of crafting this series of topics that I realized that networking changed everything for me. And and I mean, I just feel like I need to articulate that, and I just love starting any sort of lesson or any sort of sharing with a story, because I know that's just sort of the way my brain works is give me an example, and it really sticks with me more than if you just tell me something. If you just tell me, do A, do B, do C, I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. I might write it down, but it's not going to stick with me. But if somebody tells me a story and I can relate that story back, to myself, or later when something comes up, I'm like, oh, wait, I remember that story about that time when. So, like, I don't know, for me personally, stories are what help to resonate a topic with me. So I thought I would start with a story that, it's about a networking relationship, or a sort of a series of relationships I have to do the math. Well, the story is going to start about 20 years ago, but the networking relationship that's going to, you're going to see unfold in the course of this story is about 15 years long, and it's still ongoing. And you'll see as I tell the story, when I say this changed everything, I'll illustrate as we go along. And I'll try to remember to, because I tend to realize whenever I'm telling a story, I tend to get like really into the story and forget to come back and point out like the important lessons. So I'll try to remember as I'm telling the story to point out some important things, but I will definitely circle back at the end and talk about like, what some of the key takeaways were. But so I mentioned that this story starts 20 years ago. So it starts back in 2024. I'm not 2024, Lord. Okay, y'all. It starts in 2004, not 2024. That was not 20 years ago. So I just want to, and this is only minorly relevant to the story, but it's where the story begins. So this is where I'm starting. I just want to tell you a little bit about where I was personally and professionally in 2004. So in 2004, I lost my maternal grandparents about 3 months apart. And this is after I'd lost my paternal grandparents years before, and I'd lost my mother almost not quite a decade before. But so I'd lost my mother, I'd lost my other grandparents, and then my maternal grandparents died 3 months apart. And I just had this thought in my head that life was too short for me to be miserable in my job and in my work. And I should mention that up until this point, I was just a I was gonna say just like a worker drone. That sounds terrible. But I mean, I was following the normal, career path of, okay, you take a job, you try to get promoted, you try to get a raise, you maybe you change jobs periodically. Like I was just sort of following a very, the typical corporate path. And I got it in my head after my grandparents died. I was just like, life is just too short for me to be miserable. I want to do something that I love. I want to do something that I enjoy. And so I sat down and I made a list of, literally, it was just like, what do I want to do? What don't I want to do? And it was like, I don't want to wear it. This is okay. Okay. I'm really dating myself. I already told y'all the year it was, but just to really date myself, this is in the days where you wore suits to work. And like every day. And I was like, I don't want to wear a suit to work every day. I don't want to, like, so and it was like, I do want to work in a creative field, or I do want to work with children. Like, I had like a list of do's and don'ts of the things that I did want to do, things I didn't want to do. And then I put together a list of my skills and how they were applicable to some of those things. And I came out with, when I took that list and I started looking at things that I could do, that's when I found Computer Explorer. So at the beginning of this podcast, I think it was my first or second episode with Don Whalen, where we talked about franchising. And so Computer Explorers, I found the franchise Computer Explorers back then, and it sort of checked a lot of the boxes in terms of what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. So I bought the Computer Explorers franchise, and again, if you want to know more about franchising, I refer you back to that episode. But so that was me, sort of my first exit. Is it my first? Let me think. Yeah, that was my first exit from corporate America, where I was like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to, start a business, or bought a franchise, which required me to incorporate, et cetera, et cetera. So that was sort of me leaving corporate America. And I did that for about, I did it for 6 years, but it was about 3.5 years, somewhere between 3 and 4 years. And I want to say it was around the 3.5 year mark, but 3 to 4 years in is when the Great Recession hit. So the important thing to note about Computer Explorers was that, it was an education. It was technology education, but it was education, and it was, a lot of I did some what we called whole school programs, where I was contracting with like private schools, in some cases in public schools, to provide their technology education for the entire school. But a lot of it was like after school programs or supplemental education programs. And so, when the recession hit and money dried up, of course, education dollars are always the first thing to dry up, but also this was considered like supplemental or extra, and we don't need to do computer education. I mean, I don't agree with that thought, but my point is that was, like the money dried up really quick, or, like it was, the contracts were drying up pretty quick. So I struggled for like another, after the 3 or 4 years in, then I struggled for like another 2 years before finally closing the franchise and going back into corporate America. But when I made that decision that, okay, I'm going to have to close and I'm going to have to go back into corporate America, like a year ahead of that, I started looking for work. I want to say it was, about a year, somewhere between 12 to 18 months before I was going to close, I started looking for work, because the reason I could make that projection out is I had I had 2-year contracts with a public school system, and I could not, I mean, I could have broken the contract, but I would have been in court, fighting, a legal battle. So I just was like, I have to finish out these contracts. But in the meantime, again, because all of the other contracts were drying up, I wasn't making enough to sustain, the business and myself. So I was like, I need to go back into corporate, but I had to do it gradually, gently. I can't go back full time right now because I've got these contracts that I've got to, or this contract that I've got to wrap up. So I was looking for something part time. Now, this is going to be important, in a minute in the story. So I'm looking to go back into corporate America, and working in tech, it was just natural for me to go look at recruiting tech recruiting firms. That's just sort of, that was the kind of thing that I was used to doing at the time. So that's the way you found the job. You went to a recruiter and they found you a client, or they found you a full-time job, or whatever it was. So I was, reaching out to recruiters, and there was this one recruiting company. So first of all, I should mention, this is going to be a little bit of a sidetrack, but I should mention that the way that I was treated in returning to corporate America, again, I tend to tell the same stories over and over again, but I don't know what I've told on the podcast versus just told to like individual people or groups of people in like speaking conferences or whatever. But so if you've heard, stop me if you've heard this one before, but if you heard it before, you could fast forward, whatever, maybe it'll be interesting to hear again. But the way that I was treated when I was returning to corporate America was just ridiculous. I was being told, well, but you've been away for 6 years. And I'm like, Yeah, I've been away from this particular, thing that I'm applying for 6 years, but I've been running a business for 6 years. I've been doing so much more than, this thing that you're I'm interviewing for or whatever. So, and this wasn't even before I was interviewing with clients. This was just me trying to get a recruiter to agree to represent me to their clients. And they're like, "Oh, but you've been away." And so they made me take this test. So I should mention that. So I had worked in my field for I don't know. I'd have to do the math, but like 10 or 15 years before I left to go do, to go run my own business. And I'd worked, I mean, I had worked in the same field. I'd worked in my field in software engineering for longer than that, but in a very specialized field, I'd worked for 10 to 15 years before I left to go to corporate America. So as I'm coming back and I'm trying to get work in that same specialized field, um, I'm getting the, "Oh, yeah, but you've been away," and I'm like, "Yeah, it hasn't trust me, it hasn't changed that much in the time that I've been gone." And they're still like, "Wow, we're gonna make you take this test." So they made me take this test, and I was so mad because it was like the questions were presented as if they were, like, there were definitive answers, but what I did was I did, implementation consulting, specifically Oracle implementation consulting. And a lot of the questions were like, I was like, well, it's subjective. It's like there would just be a question about, and forgive me as I get a little technical, but like again, I would do Oracle Financials implementation consulting, and there'd be a question about a chart of accounts, and they it would be presented as if it was like a cut and dry answer. And I'm like, well, it depends. What is their corporate structure? How are they doing it? It was just so frustrating to try to take this test and pretend as if everything was like you could just there's no cookie cutter way to do an Oracle implementation. And so, anyways, I was like fussing and cussing the entire time I'm doing this test. And I was just so angry. And I should mention, I'm also really horrible at time tests or any kind of test, but especially time tests because of my dyslexia. So it was a struggle, and I was so mad, and I finished it, and I was like, I don't even know how I did. I was just like really frustrated. And then the results come back, and I placed in like the 98th percentile, meaning like I did really phenomenally well on the test, even though I was not sure when I finished it. And so, then I was like, okay, fine. Now will you, again, this was just to get a recruiter to put my resume in front of a client. And so I'm like, okay, now will you represent me? And so I go through all of that. And then, that was just to even get them to talk to me and or, consider presenting my resume to clients. But then when I started talking about what I needed, which was I needed part-time work, I was like, I'm looking for something maybe like 20 hours a week. Then the answer I got was, well, nobody wants your skills 20 hours a week. Like the kind of skills that you have, they want that, 40 hours a week. So again, I do software engineering. I did Oracle implementations. I did project management. And they're like, basically, there are just all these things, like the types of skills types of jobs that we can place you in are only ever going to be full-time jobs. There's no way you're going to find part-time work in that skill set. So, and I was like, there's got to be something. And anyway, so now this is where the networking story truly starts. So I feel like, and I don't want to make this about, men versus women or anything like that, but I do feel like women tend to have a little bit more empathy. And I'm not saying that all women are empathetic. Trust me, I know that is not true. And I'm not saying that no men are empathetic. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that sometimes and maybe especially in the recruiting field and especially in tech, women tend to be a little bit more empathetic, or in the recruiting field anyway. So I was talking to these recruiters, and they're like, after they put me through the testing and all the other stuff, then they're like, oh yeah, there's no way that anybody's going to want to hire, bring on your skill set for 20 hours a week. Right. So I'm like, okay, well, there was this one woman that worked at this one firm that I was talking to that she was like, let me, she's just like, I want to talk to you more about what you're looking for and just fully understand what's going on. So I think we maybe we went out to lunch or something just to like talk through what I was looking for, why I was only looking for part-time. So I kind of explained it all to her. Look, I've got these contracts that I've got to finish, running my own business. I've got these contracts that I've got to finish out. They're 2-year contracts. They won't end until this date, and until then I cannot take on a full-time job, et cetera, et cetera. And so she's like, okay. understood, it is true that it's going to be very difficult, but I will keep you in mind. It's just like, I'll keep you in mind. I'm like, okay, cool. And I don't know, how long after that conversation. I mean, it wasn't that long. It was, maybe somewhere between I don't even think it was a 6 months later. So let's just say like 3 to 5 months later, just a couple of months later. I feel like it's closer to three than it is to five. It's like 3 or 4 months later, I get a call from her, and she's like, "Hey, so here's what happened. I was having lunch with this, it's whatever the hiring manager's title was. I don't remember what his title was, but like he's like a high, director or whatever. So, she's like, I'm having lunch with this hiring manager, and he says to me, and so for those of you who are listening who are not technical, who listen for the entrepreneurship of it all, I'm getting to that part too, by the way. But for those of you who don't know SQL or SQL, it's a query language. That's specific to Oracle, and again, I had previously worked at Oracle, and Oracle was my specialty at the time, and so, well, still is. But so she's like, I'm talking to this hiring manager, and he just happened to mention that. But what I really need is I just need somebody to write SQL, some SQL reports for me. I just need somebody for like 15 to 20 hours a week, to write SQL reports. And she's like, I know exactly the person you need. So she's like, okay, she's telling me the story. And so she puts me in contact with this guy. And so I interview with him, and he brings me on as a contractor, 20 hours a week. And I'm working, and it's 20 hours a week. And this is working remotely before that was a thing. Again, we're talking, okay, I don't know, what year are we in at this point in time? At this point in the story, I think we're at 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. Let's just say 2010. So this is long before the pandemic and everybody's working from home. But again, because of me running the business, I needed to still kind of work from home because I needed to be able to shift and do stuff for the business versus, doing stuff for this guy. Anyway, so he needed somebody 20 hours a week, and he needed, and, just to write some SQL reports. He did need me in the office. So I'm working, 20 hours a week for this guy for I don't know, I'd say it was about, it's probably a year, because I think it was until I finished up my contract. Oh yeah, about 6 months in, he's like, "Okay, I want to hire you full time." I'm like, "That's great. I am not available." I was like, check back with me." And I told him the whole story. I'm like, "Look, hey, I can consider it after this date, when this contract ends." And so it was like, in 6 months, check back with me. If you still want to hire me full time, we can have a conversation. And so yeah, so after I had worked with him for, like I say, a year, doing, part time, then they hired me on full time. And so, that's how, I got into that role. Now, back to the networking, the person who got me in there, and I have not gotten permission to share people's names in, for the podcast. So there's three key women I'm gonna be talking about in this story. So I'm a Golden Girls fan. Let's just call them, we'll call them Sophia, Rose, and Blanche, just for the sake of anonymity, and it in no way reflects personality. I should just be clear there. But anyway, so let's just say, so this first person is Sophia. So I'm like really thankful to Sophia for even just remembering like the conversation that we had and getting me into that role. When she's having lunch with that hiring manager, and he says, "Hey, I just need somebody who can write SQL for me 20 hours a week." And she's like, "Oh yes, Rachel, that I know exactly who that is." So after I got that job, I think I took her out to lunch or something to thank her. And then I stayed in touch with her just because it was like, hey, you know, thank you again. This was so much, this was so helpful. And we also, found out we had a little bit of a shared history because we were both from Michigan. And so, like we would periodically just, talk, or, maybe have breakfast or something, just stayed in touch. So I'm still in touch with Sophia. And I'm at this new company. I was there for about 3 years total, and things were getting kind of sort of shaky there. And there was rumors about the company being sold, which, by the way, it did end up getting sold. So there was rumors about the company being sold, and I just, I was ready to move on. And so I call up Sophia again. I didn't consider any other recruiter, because I was like, I know she hears me. I know, um if I tell her this is what I'm looking for or whatever, like, she's going to listen, and she's going to do a good job. She's going to do her best for me. And I appreciate that. And we also at this point had a friendship. So I'm like, this is great. So I call up Sophia, And I'm like, hey, I'm looking to leave here. I don't know what's next for me, but just keep me in mind. If anything comes up, I'd love to hear about it. And she's like, you know what? I got just the thing for you. She's like, in fact, somebody was just asking me about, a project management role, and I thought you'd be perfect. But then I was like, oh, it's too bad she's not available. So she's like, yeah, you know what? In fact, what I'm going to do she's like, the hiring manager, this is where the second, networking person is going to come in. So this is where Rose is going to come into the story. So she's like, I'm going to call up the hiring manager, Rose, and I'm just going to tell her she needs to talk to you. She's like, I'm going to send her your resume, but I'm going to send her your resume and say, hey, look, here's a great resume. I know it looks great, and it may look like a lot of other resumes, but trust me, you need to talk to this person. So, she sends over my resume to Rose. So Sophia sends my resume to Rose, and she picks up the phone and she calls her and she says, just trust me, you need to interview her. I don't care. She's like, I know, I'm not saying it's not a good resume. I'm just saying that the resume cannot possibly convey to you the strength of this person. So, she's like, so she tells her, just trust me, you need to talk to her. So she sets up I have a 30-minute screening call with Rose, and it's like on a Friday afternoon. So I do this, I have the phone interview with Rose, and about 15 minutes into the conversation, I'm like, I mean, it was like clear to me she wasn't listening to me anymore. She had completely tuned in. This is by the way is a virtual call. Again, this is long before the pandemic, but this is a virtual call, a web interview, or whatever. But it's clear to me that she's not paying attention anymore. And I'm like, I don't know what I said. I must have said something wrong, but she completely tuned out in my opinion. So I finish up the 30-minute call. I don't even think it took 30. I think it was 25 minutes in. We wrap up the call. I wrap up the call with Rose. I hang up with her. I call Sophia and I'm like, hey, I don't know what happened, but Rose she just completely tuned out about 15 minutes into our conversation. And Sophia's like, what? Really? That's crazy. She's like, I'm gonna have to give her a call and find out what happened. And so she tried to reach her. She wasn't able to reach her. And she's like, well, it's Friday afternoon. She may be gone for the day. I'll call her on Monday and I'll get back to you. I'll let you know. I'm like, okay, well, thanks, But I go into the weekend kind of bummed out. I'm like, wow, I don't know. I must have really blown that interview. I don't know what I said or did, but so then I get a call back on Monday from Sophia. She's like, okay, look, I talked to Rose and you were right and you were wrong. You were right that she tuned out about 15 minutes into the conversation, but you were wrong about the reason why. She didn't tune out because you said or did anything wrong. She tuned out because she was filling out the paperwork to hire you. Like, she didn't need to hear anything else. She'd heard everything she needed to hear, and she was done with the conversation because she was trying to get you hired as quickly as possible. I was like, oh, okay, wow, that's great. So then I make the transition. I go to this second company, which is a huge company. And I go work there. And initially I'm working there as a contractor through a third-party contracting firm. And then they decide they don't want to, the company decides they don't want to work with that third-party contracting firm anymore. And so they're changing vendors. And I just decide, well, you know what? I'm just going to incorporate. This is what was the catalyst for my second corporation, my second business. I was like, I'm just going to incorporate and we'll just do corp to corp, and they ended up doing another third party, but then I just did corp to corp with that third party. But basically I was like, I'm just going to incorporate, and you guys, whoever you guys hire, as your pass through firm, they can just hire my company, and that's how we'll do this going forward. I'll just bill you guys for my time. So that was that was the catalyst for my course. So back to the entrepreneurship piece of it, that was the catalyst for the formation of my second company, and how it started off. It was just doing contract work for this one huge company. Now, so while I was at this company, so Rose was my supervisor, who was, by the way, a fantastic supervisor. She was so great. She would she she would schedule meetings with me, and she would, I'm thinking I'm in trouble, and I was, but for not the reasons that I thought. She's like, okay, it's clear to me that you are working more than 40 hours a week and you are not charging me more than 40 hours a week. She's like, and I'm not here to tell you to charge me more than 40 hours a week. I'm here to tell you to stop working more than 40 hours a week. and so, and then I mean, it wasn't because she didn't want, she was like, I'm happy to build, to pay you for your time, because there wasn't any restriction on overtime or anything like that. But she's like, but I would rather you just not work more than 40 hours a week. She was like, I know your work. It's fine. She's like, your problem is that you're too much of a perfectionist. Again, another topic for another day. But she's like, she's like, what is considered, like, what you consider to be not good enough is like more than perfection for anybody else. She's like, it's good enough. She's like, from now on, she was like, just for like the next couple of weeks, I want you just before, when you start cycling on something where you're thinking you're trying to get it better, just send it to me. Let me take a look at it and I'll tell you whether or not it's good enough. More than likely, it's good enough. So anyway, so she was great. And we used to, again, we became friends. And I remember one Thanksgiving, I took the dogs over to her house for Thanksgiving because it was just, anyways, like we just became friends and hung out and we would have dinner periodically, et cetera, et cetera. And so another person that I met while I was at that company, this is the third networking relationship in this story, is Blanche. So again, I met Rose through Sophia, and then I met Blanche through Rose because Blanche and I both reported up to Rose, and so we were both working under Rose at this company in the same role, and we got to be friends, and so then it got to the point where, because even after I left, well, I need to move on in the story because otherwise this episode will go on forever. But eventually, when I left that company and Rose and Blanche were still there, I would still meet up with them for dinner and just like, hey, what's going on? Yeah, and they would regale me of stories of what was still going on over there, whatever. So we stayed in touch over the years. So I did that for, I was at that company for 6 years before I, again, got that itch to, like, I was like, okay, I need to leave corporate America again. Well, actually, what had happened was I promised myself when I paid off my mortgage that I used to tell people, I was like, yeah, when I pay off my mortgage, I'm going to go work at Walmart as a greeter. And, I didn't necessarily mean that I was, really going to go work for Walmart. I just meant that I was just going to take any old job because I didn't need, to work some big corporate job. I could just, if I didn't have a mortgage anymore and I didn't have any debt anymore, I could just work at Target or Walmart or whatever and be perfectly fine. So what happened was I paid off my mortgage and I was like, okay, I'm leaving. And they were like, where are you going? I was like, I don't know. I'm just leaving. I'm gonna go do something else. I don't know what it is. And that was where I ended up going into teaching at the college level and teaching software engineering at a local a university. Actually, it's the third largest university in Georgia, but ended up teaching at the college level. So, but okay, that's sort of, again, off on a tangent. But I stayed in touch with all of these people over the years, and because I like I said, I ended up forming my company because of the relationship at this corporation, and then then I would take on these contract gigs, and over the course of the years, the relationship between with me and these three women, Sophia, Rose, and Blanche, yielded one full time job and one, two, three, four, or five, four contract gigs, four corporate contract gigs. So, again, this is over the course of like 15 years. But so over the course of the years, and it's not even like I keep going, like, it's not like I keep going back to the well. It's like, I'll give you an example of how so I told you about how the first two came. So the full-time gig came about, with the whole 20 hours a week, and then later turned into a full-time gig. And then when I changed companies, that was a contract gig. And then some years later, after I launched the Imperfect Genius brand. Oh yeah, this is another important part of the story. So after I launched the Imperfect Genius brand and I was starting to build the podcast and I was doing some things, I was like, okay, this is great. I'm really enjoying, what I'm doing with building this brand. But again, it was going to take some years. I'm like, it's going to take a minute before this brand is able to sustain me. I'm going to have to take on a corporate gig in order to be able to, just bring some money into the business. And I literally was just starting to think that. And I don't even think uh, I was maybe 9 months into the brand. It was like very early in the very early days. And so I was literally just starting to think that. And I had my birthday was coming up, and I traditionally will take a month off. I'm sorry. I wish I'd just taken a month off, a week off for my birthday. So my birthday was coming up and I had a week of vacation plan. And I was like, okay, I'll deal with it. And I was like, hey, I'm going to have to go try to find a corporate gig. And I don't even want to think about that because I had just been doing my own thing and working on my own, working on the brand. And I was like, ugh, I don't even want to think about it. I'll deal with it after I get back from my vacation for my birthday. And I want to say, if it wasn't the same day, it was like the next day. I was like, sometime, within 2 days of me having that thought, my friend who had been in touch, stayed in touch with regularly, Blanche from, the old job. And when I say like literally, because we don't live in the same state. And like if she was visiting, we'd go to dinner. If I was in her state, we'd go hang out or whatever. So we stayed in touch over the years. And so I'm just thinking, oh wow. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I gotta back up for a second before I get to the thing about, when I had that thought about, oh, I gotta get a corporate gig. When I first launched the podcast, Blanche had called me up and was like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe you started a podcast. I've been wanting to start a podcast for so long." She's like, "Oh, you gotta tell me, you gotta write down everything. Tell me how to do it." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'm planning on writing courses. That's not on the top of my list. I'll put that on the list. I'll write a podcast course. I'll come back to it." So like we'd been in touch, and so she also followed me on LinkedIn and other social media. So she would periodically see, me posting stuff about the podcast and, it was something she was very interested in. And what happened was I don't know, I'd posted an episode about something to do with it has something to do with tech and project management or something like that. And she saw it in her feed, and she was a program manager somewhere, and just happened to be looking for a project manager. And she was like, "Oh, right, Rachel, I forgot." She was like, "Why didn't I think to call her to see?" So she called. So again, so that, just roll the history there. And then so within 2 days of me having this thought, like, "Oh, geez, I probably need to go find a corporate gig," she calls me up again. I didn't tell her this. I didn't say it to anyone. I just thought this in my head, but she calls me up. She's like, "Hey, I'm a program manager over here now, and I need a project manager like immediately. She's like, I know you're doing this podcast, but what else are you doing? Do you have availability?" I was like, "Huh, it's funny you should ask." I was like, because I was just thinking that I needed to go, take another corporate contract, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm like, yeah, let's talk. And she's like, "Okay, can you start next week?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" I was like, "Wait, what do you mean? Can I start next week?" And I was like, "Well, first of all, no, because I'm going on vacation for my birthday." She's like, "You can go on vacation anytime." And I was like, "No, I can't. Not especially not if I'm about to take on a corporate gig. That's going to eat up all my time." But anyway, so I ended up, doing a corporate gig for her for like 6 months, whatever. And then, went back to working on the business, et cetera, et cetera. And then similarly, you all know, just from recent podcast episodes, at the end of the year when I figured out that, oh no, I'm going to need healthcare now and I'm going to have to shift again because it had been a year since I'd done that contract gig. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have to shift again. I was like, except now I need full time. I can't do a contract gig because I'm going to need full time. And then once again, it was like I had dinner with a friend of Blanche's. It's like a friend of a friend. So I had dinner with a friend of Blanche's. Well, we also had worked together before too. And I had mentioned the whole healthcare thing or whatever. So, that person told Blanche or happened to mention to Blanche. So then again, I get a call from Blanche at the beginning of the year and she's like, "Hey, I hear you're in the market. Guess what? We need a program manager." She's and then once again, so that's how I got the current corporate gig. There was more steps to it than that, but the point is, and so then that's how I got the current corporate gig. So what I'm pointing out is, so this all started with, a conversation with Sophia, 15 years ago. And I've kept these relationships going, over time. And, like the point that I want to make, the key takeaway that I want to make here is that, this wasn't like each one of these positions and all of these things that I've had over the years and things coming up. I mean, there is a little bit of luck to the timing of some of it, but it wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidental. It was alignment and consistency. Like I was aligned with people who know my skill set and who are in the same field and have, are in positions of power that have an opportunity to, suggest my name when a need is needed. And they've worked with me and they know my skill set. I'll just like that time I told you when, Sophia's like, "I'm just going to call Rose and I'm just going to tell her she needs to talk to you." Like resume is only going to tell her so much. She needs to have a conversation with you. Like having those champions, in your life, it's just very important. So, I just want to, because I feel like I'm getting to the point where I'm rambling a little bit. So I want to make a couple of key points to just sort of wrap some things up. So first of all, I think that one of the things that works best, and that this story illustrates is that these were not transactional relationships. I could have just, treated Rose or Sophia as a recruiter and just, once she got me the job, just, forgot all about her because she got me the thing that I wanted. Like that would be transactional. But I was genuinely, because I had, I was in a tough spot and I was asking for a unique thing and she heard me and she remembered and she was able to, find an opportunity for me. And I was genuinely thankful. I was like, this is great. Now, and, it continued the conversation, continued the relationship over years. Our connection was human. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't me going to a recruiter and, with the script of this is what I need and this is how much money I wanted. It was like, look, here, this is what my deal is, and this is what I need, and here's why I need it. Can you help me? I was just human. Also, with all of these people, I wasn't trying to connect with them to try to impress them or, trying to flex in any way. I just was like, hey, I can help you, you can help me, or whatever. Like these were genuine connections. The other thing I want to point out is, the different types of relationships. And some people can play multiple things. You have like mentors that come into your life. You have sponsors, people who are like, so Sophia was a sponsor. She sponsored me with Rose. Rose, who was my supervisor, was a mentor. Sophia was also a connector, connected me with other people. Blanche was a connector. So you have these different types of relationships, and different types of people that you want in your network when you're talking about building your network and maintaining a network. You want to think about the different types of relationships that are important. So, like I say, mentors, sponsors, connectors, those are and peers, of course. Those are all really good types of relationships to make sure that you maintain in your network. And also, these were not one time interactions. These were ongoing relationships, and there was an accumulated trust because again, these people had worked with me before. They knew, like, Sophia felt confident, reaching out to Rose and saying, "Hey, trust me, you just need to interview this person," because she knew that when she placed me in earlier roles, that I didn't just show up and like I, I'm deciding if I'm going to mark this as explicit, but I didn't just show up and show my ass. Like I basically, I did the work. I did a good job. I didn't do anything crazy. I didn't make her look bad, So she trusted that I would represent her, her, because again, at that time I was going contracting through her. She trusted that I was going to represent her firm well. Similarly, when Blanche was recommending me to these other contract gigs, she knew my work. She'd worked with me. She knew my work ethic. She felt confident that I could fill that role and that I would, again, not make her look bad in terms of, her making the recommendation for me. So, I think one of the important things to note is that networking is not about just simply collecting people's information and collecting business cards or making meaningless connections on social media just to get more followers or more connections on LinkedIn or whatever it is. It's about cultivating real relationships. Like if you want your network to really work for you, you got to cultivate real relationships. And one relationship can change your life. But you have to approach it with authenticity and treat it with respect. So again, 15 years of full-time and contract work, you know, all from that one relationship with just a genuine conversation with Sophia about, hey, look, this is what I need. I know it's not ideal. This is what my situation is. And then obviously I had to show up and actually, know what I was doing and do the work. But it's very important. You're being authentic and treating these relationships with respect as opposed to treating them as transactional. Like, what can I get out of this person? And then not ever talking to them again or only ever reaching out to them when you need something. That is not a way to build a genuine relationship in your network. So, I would say the lesson that I want you to take away is to approach networking from the perspective of connection and not, opportunity, or, don't think of it as like you're trying to use people or what can I get, what can I get out of this? I mean, yeah, that's in the back of your mind, what you can get out of it, but that's not the point of the relationship and making the connections. Yeah, I think that's where I want to leave it. So, I'd love to hear your questions, or, if you've got a great networking story, give us a call or send me a text at 404-425-9862. Or you can connect with me on social media at Ask Imperfect Genius. And as I mentioned, this is going to be a little bit of a mini series. Like I said, I might do two, maybe three episodes, take a break, and then come back and do two more. I haven't really decided the cadence, but I'm going to do a series of episodes where I'm going to break it down in terms of this one. I wanted to start off the series with a story so that you can see the power of networking. And then the subsequent episodes will be about, like, okay, how can you build these networks, and how can you build these genuine networks and actually make them work for you. So until next time, this is Rachel Foster reminding you, while your journey may not be flawless, it can be phenomenal.